Wait, it's working there. Now we are. All right. Well, we are...
Slap happy.
We're a little slap happy today. So this could be real interesting. We're going to wait for people to join us. We went on maybe a minute early just to get everything fired up. Somebody's there. Not sure who it is yet, but at least have one person.
We have one person with us. Hi.
Hi.
Hi to
Hello
you.
to the one person watching. We're glad you're with us. So as you come on, make sure you say hello, where you're from, all that stuff. Now we got a bunch of people on. That ruins the joke. We're so glad to be with you tonight. My name is Johnny. I'm a grateful believer. I struggle with alcoholism and codependency.
Hey, Johnny. And I'm Jenny. I'm a believer who struggles with codependency and adult child and family dysfunction.
Hi, Jenny.
Hi.
So thank you for joining us tonight on Facebook Live. We're glad to be back with you. And we've had some really great conversations on Facebook with some of our teams. So it's been really great.
It has. And, maybe we should talk about the fact that we're wearing the shirts.
Oh, I was just going to kind of let that go the whole time. But that's a good idea. Yeah, we are actually have on the shirts for the Celebrate Recovery Come Rejoice online summit. So if you want to check that out, you go to celebraterecovery.com or crsummits with an s.com to sign up for the summit. We've got one summit this year. It's online, $49 a person. You sign up, 5 people get a 6th person free. What else do we need to tell them about the summits? We've got a lot of good stuff.
Oh, I get so excited. Every day I get a little bit more and more excited. And as we get closer and I keep hearing about all the different talks that are going to be there this year. A couple of nights ago when Carol and Rodney got on and they gave the descriptions. I hadn't even heard all the descriptions yet, had you?
No,
And we sat there the same going, oh, that's so
Can't
good.
wait to hear that one, yeah.
Yeah, I can't. We are so excited. I'm getting excited about what I get to talk about. Cheryl and I are really excited about talking about codependency.
I was going to say, yeah, tell them a little bit what you're talking about.
Yeah, so Johnny's mom, Cheryl and I are going to talk about codependency. It's funny, it can kind of be even though it's a really common area of recovery, it can be hard to explain to somebody else what it is exactly. I have friends that I'm like, oh, I'm in recovery for codependence. And they're like, well, what is that exactly?
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, hold on, let me look it up real fast on the dictionary to explain it to you. It can just be kind of tricky. So we've been working really hard on it, and I think we've had a really good time kind of processing through it together and going, oh yeah, that's good, that makes sense, and what does it look like for you? And we're just really excited to get a chance to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about the difference between recovery and sobriety, because those are two very different things. And so I'm going to be talking, my thesis is that we all should be chasing recovery, not just sobriety. For many of us, sobriety is a part of recovery, but it's not recovery in itself. Mm-hmm. So, and then you and I are going to be talking about what Celebrate Recovery is and why people should be a part of it.
And we're excited about that because hopefully, being that the summit is online this year, we're hoping that a lot of newcomers can come.
Yeah.
I think there was a lady online last night who said that her 2 daughters are going to join online with her this year, and that this will be their first introduction to recovery, and I'm so excited about that. And we kind of looked at her one day. We're really excited to do that because we want as many people joining us online this year as possible.
Yeah, and one of the things about this summit too, because it's online this year instead of either in Tennessee or here in California, is that anybody can attend. So although it's always been open to whoever wants to attend the summit, it's been geared really more towards leaders, where we cover the 7 keys of Celebrate Recovery and how to start and grow a Celebrate Recovery. And this year, it really is more geared to all of us who are in recovery. There's some stuff specifically for leaders. Pastor John Baker, my dad and founder of Celebrate Recovery, is going to be talking about characteristics of leadership.
Absolutely, yeah.
And there's going to be some talks that will be applicable to those of us who are in leadership. My phone's ringing. But most of the summit is going to be geared really towards all of us, and there's going to be a lot of practical, personal things to help us no matter where we're at in our recovery, whether we're brand new to Celebrate Recovery or we've been in recovery for decades. Yeah. So really excited about that. Really so celebraterecovery.com or crsummits.com to register, $49 a person. So lots of good stuff coming up with that. Tonight we want to talk a little bit about kind of how we got involved in Celebrate Recovery.
Yeah, we've
and
been
our
talking
own recovery
this past
journeys.
couple weeks about recovery, and I realized we don't really have shared a little bit about our personal journey into recovery.
Right.
So
Right. Yeah, and I think that it's it's good. We've really enjoyed listening to everybody else as they've talked about their journey into recovery and things like that. And so we thought we'd just give you a little bit of an idea about how Jenny and I got into recovery. I want to brag really quickly. Yesterday we celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary, so we've been married 20 years in a row to each other. So that's pretty cool. And so taking that time yesterday to kind of think about 20 years, all the things that have happened in 20 years, it was just kind of like, oh man, there's a lot of life in that time.
A lot of life. I mean, we both got into recovery during that time.
Yeah, and so I thought we would just talk a little bit about our story. So for many of you, you know that Pastor John and Cheryl, the founders of Celebrate Recovery, are my parents. And so I was invited to attend Celebrate Recovery before it started. So
I like how you were invited to
I was invited to attend. So
mandatorily, right?
Right. So my parents, my parents had gone through a rough time with my dad's alcoholism. And one night my mom asked my dad to go to counseling with her to kind of work on some of their issues. Or leave, and he decided to leave, and that began our recovery journey. We didn't know it at the time, but that began our recovery journey. He was an active alcoholic, and while he was separated from my mom for those 13 months, he worked on his own recovery through traditional recovery, and he knew that he needed a higher power who was Jesus. He had a relationship with Christ when he was younger, and he knew that his higher power was Jesus. In his particular groups, he had a hard time with that, and when he went to we invited him to come back to church with us when my parents reconciled, and when he came to Saddleback, he wanted to kind of talk about his alcoholism issues, but he had some hard times being that open with the men and men's Bible studies there. And so he wrote Pastor Rick a short, concise 13-page single-space letter. Many of you have heard this before, outlining the vision of Celebrate Recovery. And on November 21st, 1991, we had our very first Celebrate Recovery meeting. And like I said, I was invited to attend. I got to be the setup and tear down guy. And I also got to lead the teens group, which was great because we had no idea what we were doing. We should have called it Complain About Your Parents, because that's what we did.
Complain about your parents?
We did, yeah. We sat in the cafeteria of the mental hospital that we had Celebrate Recovery met in at the time, because Saddleback didn't have any buildings yet. And so we sat around and kind of said how much we wish we weren't there.
I like how your dad said,
my dad.
I'm getting an accent.
Yeah.
Your dad said when he started attending recovery, before he wrote that letter to Rick, he said, kind of looking around at the church, being a pretty big church even then, going, I can't be the only one in this whole congregation who is struggling with alcoholism or struggling with some kind of addiction. So I just wanted to show.
Yeah, and the program
he went, I can't be the only one.
Right. The program really was designed for our family and people like us at our church. Neither John or Cheryl had a vision that Celebrate Recovery would be in 35,000 churches all over the world, and 5 million people would have completed your steps.
Right?
Yeah, they would have ran the other way. And we all probably would have laughed because we just, there's not a choice.
Yeah.
I went through a step study at 16 as a codependent, and I'm fast forwarding a little bit. When you and I met in college ministry.
Yeah.
And we began dating and got engaged and got married. And in college, I had begun drinking heavily. And I really thought that I would be able to make better decisions than my dad did. And I'd be able to show him, you made mistakes, but this is how you can do this and also function and not be an alcoholic. And in December of 1999, I got arrested for a DUI, and on the way to the
we were engaged.
On the way to jail that night, I remember telling the police officer that you were gonna break up with me because you weren't gonna stand for that kind of behavior. But thankfully, you didn't, and we got married. But then everything was perfect after that. The end. Thanks for joining us tonight. But when Jenny got pregnant with our oldest daughter, Maggie, I realized that I could not sustain the lifestyle I was, because I was drinking in secret behind her back. She didn't know how often and to the extent that I was drinking, and I knew that I couldn't continue that once Maggie came around. So I began attending recovery and eventually Celebrate Recovery for my issues, and then eventually.
eventually started suggesting
Yeah.
that I might have some issues myself, and that
I would hint around,
Heavily,
right? That there might
hint.
be an issue.
heavily hint
Yeah.
that, Jenny, I think you might be a codependent. But I'm very stubborn.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if somebody tells me to do something, usually I'm probably going to walk the other direction.
Yeah.
I was very stubborn. And even though I was a glaring codependent, I mean, I had some pretty major codependency issues in my life at that point.
But part of what you and my mom are going to be talking about at the summit is kind of being able to identify codependency in your life. Because again, that's
Yes.
sort of a catch-all term in a lot of ways.
Well, in recovery was not a part of my life up to that point.
Well,
You know what I mean?
it wasn't possible for us at the time because in some ways I began working for the church. I began working for Celebrate Recovery, and I had to be there on Friday nights. And my recovery was crucial because I needed to be sober.
Yeah.
And so there were things that you couldn't join a step study because we had little kids at home.
Yes.
And you couldn't. I had to travel once in a while, and so you know.
And there was that part of me, that stubbornness and that fear, because I think once you became Johnny Baker, and you really started working for our Celebrate Recovery, there was that fear. I was a little bit afraid to step into it.
Right.
You know, it felt a little bit too public. It didn't feel. I was worried that it'd be, oh, here comes Johnny's wife, or here comes John and Cheryl's daughter-in-law, which were really just excuses,
Right.
honestly.
Right, but-
because it's a safe program.
right.
We all know it's a safe program. But that's what I was telling myself in my head, really, because I just was afraid and I was stubborn. You
But
know?
then you did eventually join a
But
step
then I
study.
did. So then, if you fast forward a couple weeks ago, I talked about how I attended the first couple of summits as just not even as a participant, just an observer. There is Johnny's wife, and it was at the summit a couple of years after that where I was sitting with Cheryl, and we were in one of the workshops. I think Women Leading. And Cheryl said, "Hey Jenny, would you want to get into recovery with pastors' wives?" And I went, "Oh, yes, I do.
Mm-hmm.
Yes." And so from there I got into a step study and got into recovery. And when I do remember that sitting in my first step study, actually before I even got into a step study, before that, Life Healing Choices. So when Life Healing Choices
Right,
came out,
that
our
was our small
church
group.
did Life Healing Choices small groups, and I joined a small group for Life Healing Choices. And I remember sitting in that life group. Oh gosh, this is so embarrassing to admit. But I remember going, I don't know how to answer these questions the right way,
Yeah.
because I didn't even know how to identify with anything yet. You know, I still wasn't sure exactly what codependency was. I didn't know what my issues were. I knew I needed recovery. That much I knew. I just didn't know what it meant to identify and what to identify with. And so as a result, I felt like I didn't know how to answer the questions because in my mind, I had to know what filter I was filtering through the questions through. So,
Right.
which is,
Well,
neither here nor there. But
it's part of your.
it's part of
how you are,
part of
right.
how I am.
Yeah.
So fear of doing something wrong, right? That's a big part of who I am. So fast forward, in my first step study, my leader brought these problem solution pamphlets, and she was like, read through. These are some of the different areas of recovery that you can work on here at Celebrate Recovery, and it lays out what the area of recovery is, what it looks like, and then the solution, what recovery looks like for that particular area. And so reading through them, the two that obviously popped out were codependency and adult child family dysfunction.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of came into identifying with those two. And what got me into recovery was my codependency with my mom. I had a lot of unhealthy codependency with my mom, and I thought because Johnny was already into recovery, I didn't really have any issues there. But I realized that my codependency also played into our marriage as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we were talking about earlier today is to kind of what got us into recovery, and then what's kept us in recovery, because we're still in recovery today, and I think that's one of the things that has been so clear to me is that although I've been sober for almost 16 years, I still have a lot of different issues in my life that recovery applies to. I don't think about drinking. I don't have the compulsion or even the desire to drink. I never think about it. But I do have relationships, and so I have codependency in my life. I do have anger issues from time to time. I do, you know what I mean? And all these different things that happen, I still have hurts, hangups, and habits in my life. And you know what? One of the things this quarantine has shown me is that there are still many of them in my life. They may not be on the same level as my alcoholism was, but there are other things as well.
Absolutely.
And recovery doesn't stop just because I've been sober for a while.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that has been, you know, we're a family of recovery with my parents and us, and, you know, so many we talk about and think about recovery. But this isn't a job for us. This is our life. And so I think that it's just something to keep in mind is that, you know, as we go through some of these issues, there will be excuses from time to time, right? So you said when you first began, you had a number of excuses when you know, and all those kinds of things. And so what happens now when we look, and maybe we talk about our own lives, when there's something that we feel like we should do for recovery, but we don't want to, or we can make excuses for, like, what are some ways to fight against that?
Well, I think staying in recovery is huge. I love it. I think what's one of the neatest things about I'm not going to answer your question because
that's fine. I didn't prepare you for it.
I can answer it, but to tell you the truth, I lost track of what you were saying by the time you got to the end of the question.
Oh my gosh! Wow. Wow.
I know, just because.
No, that's fine. I talked too long. Got it.
No, that's not it at all. I just have a hard time paying attention sometimes. Focusing on staying in. I mean, we did say
20 years.
I know.
20 years.
I'm sorry. We've been locked together a long time. It's
when you have an excuse, what are some things that keep us in recovery when maybe we feel, you know, like it's Friday night?
Some things keep us in recovery. Yeah. Okay, so I love being in recovery and the impact that has on our families. A couple of years ago, we did a workshop at One Summit. It's called Family Impact, and how one of the great things about being in recovery is that you can work on cycles of dysfunction and stopping those cycles, how to not continue passing those on to our kids. And so pretty early on in recovery, we went, here are some things we don't want to pass on to our kids. I mean, that's kind of what motivated you to get into recovery.
That's a huge part of it.
In the first place is I don't want my kids to see me drinking. I don't want to pass this on. And so that was one cycle that we have been able to, that you stop before our kids don't know you struggling with alcohol.
But it's a huge part of it, you know, stopping the cycle of dysfunction in our family is a huge reason for us to stay in recovery.
So we have, and I'll talk, and I will get into a lot more of this in our codependency talk at the summit, but there are some specific cycles of dysfunction that were really important to me not to pass on. I mean, I talk a lot about fear. Fear is a big issue that I have struggled with my entire life, and that's a cycle, or that's a dysfunction that I didn't want to pass on. I think I didn't want to pass my fears on to my kids. And so having to work on what those fears were, what they were founded in first, and recovery helped me to do that so that I could stop passing those fears on to my kids as well, as some other things. And
can I tell a cool story that happened a couple of nights ago?
Yeah.
So we had.
As long as it's not.
It's not about you. No, it's not about you. Not everything's about you, Jenny. We had my parents came over for dinner. We sat in the backyard, and Mac has kind of brought this up too. How we have to say this. We were social distancing, right, and practicing all of those safety precautions, all that stuff. But my parents came over. We were having dinner in the backyard, and we were talking about, my dad and I were talking about sobriety and how long we've been sober and just kind of some of those things. And we don't often do that. That's not a huge part of conversation. We talk about recovery a lot. Yeah. We don't talk about our own parts of that very often, just the two of us. We were talking about that, and Jimmy, my son, was standing there listening to us. And my dad looked at Jimmy and he said, "Jimmy, it would be real smart of you just to never consider drinking." Just with your dad's history, we call him Papa, with your Papa's history, just be real smart of you just to avoid that temptation completely and never experiment with it. Just never start. And you know, Jimmy's 11, and so but he said, "Oh, I'm never going to." Now, does that mean he's never going to? Yes, we recorded it, and if he does, no, I was kidding. But we, having those conversations now, my hope is that the thing that I thought I could do right was my dad didn't know how to do this right, and I'll do it better, learning from his mistakes. I'm hoping that cycle will just be broken. I'm hoping that there'll be a different way for him to handle things.
That's the great thing about being in recovery as a family. I mean, our kids, they just are around it. We talk about it. We talk about them. We talk about the fact that you struggled with alcohol. We talk about my codependency. We talk about what that looks like. One of the things that I had to learn in my codependency is how to share, how to express, first how to acknowledge how I'm feeling.
Right.
Learn my own emotions, and then learn how to express that. And so one thing we are working really hard with our kids on is how to acknowledge their feelings. How are you feeling? And then make a safe place for them to share with us how they're feeling. And I wrote this in one of my New Testimony revisions that I wrote. But early on in my recovery, my kids were little. And the verse, and I'm not going to know the exact location, but quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger was one that kept popping out over and over and over again in my recovery. And that was a big part of my recovery early on, right? And then fast forward, now I have 2 teenage daughters at home. And I have had to relearn the importance of that verse, quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger, because my controlling instincts, my gut reaction, my knee-jerk reaction things is I want to flip that order, right?
Right.
I want to be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. I'm usually fast. I react fast. I'm an emotional reactor, so I'm quick to anger, right? Because I react so emotionally, and then I'm quick to speak to tell them how they should do things. Hey, this is how you should do these things. And then usually what I love is I'm last to listen, and hopefully it's to them telling me how right I am about the situation, right? Like, oh, Mom, thank you so much.
She literally said today that if everyone would just listen to me, this would all be so much easier.
Oh, I wish I hadn't, but I did say that.
Yeah, and I think, but I think that's such a good point, because I think we can come across of like, oh, we've been around those mistakes and going, man, one of my kids was trying to tell me how they felt, and I went into fixing.
Having to relearn and relearn and relearn.
And what I should do is allow them to talk, and then go back and say, hey, I'm sorry that I cut you off, or I'm sorry that I tried to fix, and those kinds of things.
Absolutely. So staying in recovery keeps it in front of your mind,
right? So it isn't just like, oh, I'm in recovery, so I'm doing this right all the time, but there are tools when we do it wrong. And I think that's so important as well. I think that there are, we talk about relapse, and in Pastor John's book, Life Healing Choices, it says, the 4 stages of relapse, and one of them, the relapse is catastrophe. And a relapse can be a major catastrophe in our life, but it also can be just a setback, right? Not a relapse, but something can happen in our lives that can kind of make us step back a little bit and go, oh man, I didn't do that right. But that can be a lesson. That can be something that we go, and I'm not saying that that's a relapse. I'm saying if we're dealing with something where, I got a little angrier, or I said something I didn't listen, or I kind of jumped into this in a different way.
We might have to relearn lessons.
Right. And it's
without it being.
Right. And applying those tools. I think, one of the things that has been so freeing for me is learning the guidelines of Celebrate Recovery. And one of the guidelines in our share groups is that we're here to support one another, not fix one another. And I think that I am a fixer. I'm not a handyman fixer. I break things if I try to fix them, but I am a person fixer. I want to fix problems. And sometimes that's for them, often it's for me. So I feel good because I don't like the tension, I don't like the negative emotion, so I want to fix that so everything is better. But when I've finally learned the guidelines, not just how to abide by them in the group, but really why they're so important. And if you want to learn about the guidelines, you can go to celebraterecovery.com. There's an About tab, and you can click on the guidelines. Or if you have any of the material, it'll be in there as well. And if you're doing a CR online group, there's even some additional guidelines to help keep it all safe as long as it's online. But when I really learned that the guidelines could be applied outside of that circle.
100%, yeah.
And by listening and just sitting next to and saying, man, I don't know how to fix that, but I'm here. How powerful that is. That when something happens in our marriage, or something happens with our kids, or something happens outside of here,
yeah,
I don't have to fix it.
Yeah, the guidelines. I mean, recovery as a whole has taught me how to be a better wife, a mother, friend, daughter. Sure. But a big part of that is learning to be a better listener. And the guidelines, I mean, have taught me so much on that. So,
well, I think I
love the guidelines.
That's why we are so, somebody asked earlier if you're going to be teaching on the guidelines at the summit. You're not at this summit.
No, you get a break from hearing me talk about the guidelines.
but we love the guidelines, and if it was up to us, we would enforce them around our dinner table. But I think when it comes to something like no crosstalk and no fixing, part of that really is when I'm in a group, if I'm in a 1 hour open share group, if I'm going to share for 3 to 5 minutes of that time, the rest of that time, the other 50 or so plus minutes, I'm listening to other people share. I can't say anything and I can't fix them. So all I can do is listen. And that has actually, I think, made me a better listener. Because there's times where I know I still do this, where I'm waiting for my chance to speak, or I'm trying to, win an argument or whatever it is. Yeah. But when I can say, wait, stop for a second, let them share, even if it's in a conversation, just listen and don't try to talk over them. Don't do that. Just listen. And then maybe there isn't a solution. Maybe you can't fix this. Maybe there is something I need to do. And that's another part of recovery is taking the initiative for the things I can do, cleaning up my side of the street. Maybe I need to make amends, or I need to offer forgiveness, or we need to work through a problem together or with other people. And I think that there are just so many tools that we learn in recovery that are applied across such a wide area of our lives.
So here's can I share this cool story about what Chloe shared?
Yeah, please.
All right. So along the lines of stopping cycles of dysfunction, we have worked really hard, I feel like, to allow our kids to talk about their feelings, acknowledge their feelings with us as a family. And so we have our middle daughter is 14, and she was having some friend issues, and they were they just hurt feelings, right? Which is so easy to do, especially in this stay-at-home order right now. Only communicating over the phone or on Zoom, it's so easy or text, it's so easy to get hurt feelings going, especially in junior high.
Yeah.
But one thing I'm so impressed with is she has friends. She has the courage, I feel like, because it does take a lot of courage, to be honest, and to tell her friends when her feelings have been hurt. And her friends have the ability to listen to her and validate her and listen and apologize. And she tells me these conversations that she has with her friends, and they're 14.
Right.
I mean, they're in junior high, and they're able to have these conversations. And she tells them to me, and I'm always shocked. I'm shocked to hear. I'm really hurt because, and I'm really sorry to hear that you're hurting. How can I help? Or just the fact that they allow each other to have these open conversations at 14 is shocking to me.
Kind of mind-blowing.
Because I was not having conversations like that at 14. I mean, I still going to have conversations like that at 40. So the fact that my 14-year-old can't, that's another proof of what recovery can do, how it can get in and how it can stop these cycles of dysfunction. And actually, she was talking to a friend of hers, and she was telling her how she's talking through about some of the things that she's hurting. And her friend said to her, and I love this, she said, Chloe.
She's our daughter.
I know. She said so much.
I said Maggie and Jimmy on this too. So
she said, Chloe, I'm so excited for you that you're able to work through the hurts in your life right now. And I thought, wow. I mean,
it's pretty big.
It's really cool that a 14-year-old can acknowledge the impact that working on your hurts and acknowledging your hurts can have on your life. So I just think that's another cool example of stopping some cycles of dysfunction.
Yeah, and so there's I've been kind of trying to keep an eye on some of the comments that are coming through. We do have a few people who are brand new to recovery tonight that are hurting. So we're just so glad you're with us tonight, and
welcome. I am glad you're here.
That are figuring this out and kind of beginning this journey alongside us. And we're just so glad you're here with us. And what you'll find is that none of us are going to come at it like we've got it all figured out, that we're doing it all right and we know what we're doing, but we're all on the road at different different intervals. Some will be ahead of you, some will be behind you, and some will be alongside you as you begin your journey. And we're just excited to walk along the road to recovery with you. So I'd really encourage you to go to celebraterecovery.com and click on Find a Group and look for a church in your area. Right now, your church may only be meeting online like ours is, and so your Celebrate Recovery may be done over Zoom. I know that there's some stuff in the news today about churches. Hold on that for a little while. Let's wait to see whatever individual church does with that kind of stuff. And I'm excited to get back together with my church family and my Celebrate Recovery family. But we're going to have to follow what our church does. And if you're at a local Celebrate Recovery, you're going to need to do the same thing with your church. But as we're able to get together in person again, I know we're all really looking forward to that. But in the meantime, we do have our CRCR groups, Celebrate Recovery Crisis Response groups, and you can learn more about that at the website as well. And I'd really encourage you to begin your recovery journey tonight, or if you've been in recovery for any length of time, to take your next step, to do the next thing that you need to do to keep in your recovery journey. And we're just so glad that you joined us tonight. We're really excited to see so many of you online every week and every night during these Facebook Lives, and we're so excited for the summit. Don't forget crsummits.com to register for the summit. $49 a person, register 5, get 1 free. And I really can't wait to hear about all the people you're inviting with that free ticket. So that's such a great way to invite somebody, is to say, hey, our church registered 15 people, so we've got 3 free tickets. Who do you want? Who are we going to invite to that? Is it going to be a pastor? Is it going to be a neighbor? Is it going to be a counselor in your area? Just some really cool different things that you can do. Anything you want to say before we say goodbye?
No, come to the summit. It's going to be awesome.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we'll see you tomorrow. We won't, but I don't even know who's on tomorrow anymore. But
I'm not sure either.
Yeah, but we'll be watching. So bye, everybody.
Bye,
See
guys.
ya.